Let the vengeance begin!
Howdy, howdy, Sudevil here, and welcome to another installment of Improving Total War Warhammer. And in this installment, I really want to talk about trolls specifically. Now, as it stands, and this has always been the case, trolls have never really been a part of, I don't want to say any good army, but their use is actually quite limited in the game, specifically because their leadership is incredibly low. It is so easy to counter them with just anything. And this is one of those videos where I would like to improve my enemy, because I think it would be more interesting and make for more interesting gameplay and to be more in line with lore. I love lore when it comes to trolls, and Warhammer lore is great, and when it comes to how powerful they are, how fast they regenerate, which is one of their big things, and how terrified they are of fire. And even the old D&D lore, one of my favorite stories, I mean, I read this a very long time ago, but it was a troll game. So someone was spying on a group of trolls, and one of their games was to fight each other, and the winner would rip the other one's head off and throw it away as far as he could. And they always regenerate fully, so it doesn't kill them, but that's kind of a fun troll game. And there's lots of lore where trolls can regenerate so fast. I mean, it's not like the cuts are closing as they open, but they really do regenerate fast. And in this game, you just don't see a lot of trolls, because it is very, very easy to counter them with anything. Now, if you just look at the troll stats, they're really good with the exception of leadership, and they do have regeneration and a weakness to fire damage. But basically the improvements I want to suggest for trolls will enhance this mechanic very specifically, because I would love to see them be more of a part of this game, in that if you don't have a very specific counter, it is actually quite difficult to counterplay against trolls. But if you do, you can counterplay them effectively, and the person bringing the trolls, has more play as well. Because right now, it's easy to counterplay trolls because their leadership is 40. I mean, you hit them with a piece of artillery, they got -10 leadership from artillery, and hit them with one volley of arrows, they got -5 leadership from being hit by arrows, and then bang, they're routing. And they're already susceptible to arrows because they only have 40 armor. But really, I think spending more time focusing on the fire damage aspect of the troll, their weakness to fire damage, and enhancing their regeneration, and making it so if they have burnt on them, the burnt debuff on them, it really means something. So what I want to do is I just want to go and do some basic testing to show the trolls are actually pretty powerful as they are. So we're going to take a look at a group of dwarf warriors. They have charge defense against large, and I'll show a few tests just so you can see that, I mean, trolls in and of themselves as a unit are no joke. They're quite powerful, and they could be something to bring in the game. So I'll just get my dwarf warriors here, and we'll just maybe spread them out a little bit like we would normally see them, and we'll start that battle, and we'll see the trolls will come in, and they instantly just start crushing my dwarf warriors. Now, they don't have a whole lot of armor, and my dwarf warriors don't have a whole lot of armor piercing, so they're going to do fairly good against the trolls in the amount of damage they're going to do, but the trolls regenerate, and you can see the trolls are maybe 3/4, 2/3 health, and they've just destroyed my dwarf warriors. Like, this is how it should be, right? At least that. So we'll go and take a look at another unit. We'll take a look at Longbeards, because Longbeards are quite a bit more powerful than dwarf warriors. We know that, and we will take a look. I just want to demonstrate that trolls stat for stat, if they're allowed to operate, are actually really good. It's just the ability to counterplay against them is it's outrageous, really. Like, you can do anything. There's so many ways to defeat trolls just because of their leadership, and we'll show that when their leadership is not an issue, they are very, very powerful. Not that I think you got to be careful, because when you make any changes like this, you can make a unit that is already pretty good, absolutely ridiculous. But even here the trolls are taking some damage, and the Longbeards should do some damage to them, but they're still winning, and they're generally, we got to watch this. Their leadership is just going down, but they're generally going to win this fight, and they should. Really, they've got no other pressure on them, and stat for stat, they have armor-piercing damage. They have regeneration. They should win this battle actually quite handily, and probably even more so than what that is, because that's kind of their forte. So we'll just now grab Warriors of Dragonfire Pass, because they do fire damage, so that's going to do even more damage to the trolls, and we'll just see how they do. Trolls will actually still do pretty good. Like trolls, it's just when anything at all affects their leadership, they just absolutely collapse. And I'm going to demonstrate that just so it's very clear. Okay, so we'll get that going. And you can see now Warriors of Dragonfire Pass will do better against trolls because they do fire damage, right? And they should. But they're still losing. And because the trolls are still a pretty decent unit, I mean, this is going to resolve out relatively quickly. But with no other pressure, the troll's allowed to operate even against a unit that does fire damage. The unit that does fire damage is going to do much better against them. And we'll just hate it when the AI does this, but we'll just make sure we get our charge defense against large. And now, unfortunately, we're winning that. But I mean, this should be more of a thing. Obviously fire damage, so the Warriors of Dragonfire Pass are going to win that pretty easily. So we'll go and take a look at the ending. We'll end that battle, and because trolls have lots of counterplay as it is. Like, I just want to show how fast Slayers beat up trolls. Like, they absolutely demolish trolls. Now trolls do damage to Slayers too, but this is the hard. This is kind of not the total hard counter to trolls, because they don't do fire damage or imbue flame damage. But we'll just see how fast a group of Slayers can dispatch a group of trolls. So get in there. The Slayers are taking damage, but they're absolutely starting to crush the trolls, and away they go. And the trolls are gone with a lot of leadership left, and they've killed 18 of our warriors, our Slayers rather. So and now I'll show what I mean with you add anything to the mix. So Dwarf Warriors, we know, lose pretty handily, so we're just going to put one simple unit of Rangers also in that mix. And this is where the extra damage and leadership is just crushing. Now, in the lore, would a troll honestly be even worried about a toothpick sticking out of it? No. And that's the kind of the thing that I would like to address with trolls in general, is that I think you should have to bring something that is specifically designed as counterplay. So we bring in those Rangers. They're just going to take shots at the trolls. That extra -5 by being hit by missile fire is starting to absolutely crush them. And instead of beating the unit, they lose quite badly. And they only get 15 kills on our Dwarf Warriors. Like, these Rangers actually shouldn't be as strong a counterplay to trolls. Really, what you should do, so we'll go and grab what should be the correct unit that is the strongest counterplay against trolls, and that would be something like a where do we go? A Iron Drake, or any unit that does fire damage. But Iron Drake gives that burnt debuff, okay, of -10, and so we'll just get in here and we'll just see how that goes. It does actually go better than the Rangers. Like, it goes much faster. They only got 9 kills in this case, but really that should be the hard counter. The hardest counter is something that imbues the burnt thing, and that should absolutely terrify trolls. So how could you enhance this part of the gameplay and make trolls actually a more interesting unit, and something that if you don't have a counter for them, trolls can just really perform in a battle so that it's worth the risk of bringing them. And there'll be some factions where trolls are really strong if they don't have a lot of fire damage, or they can't imbue the burnt debuff. So what I would like to see is, I think their stats are mostly fine. And I think you could actually do this by changing their regeneration to a special troll regeneration. So instead of saying just regeneration, it could be, you know, a special ability that includes a even more powerful regeneration, so that, and it could say if the troll's health is above 20%, they get plus 12 leadership, which I know it sounds like a lot, but it actually isn't when you look at what the counters do, but gives them plus 12 leadership if their health is above 20%, and they get still have a weakness to fire. You could even make that weakness to fire stronger, like, you know, even 50%. You know, you could make it really quite strong, but make up for that with some regeneration. But if you wanted to leave it 20% and just make their regeneration more, I guess that would be something. It would need some testing to really balance this out, but the idea is that they have an ability that if their health is above 20%, they get plus 12 leadership, and they regenerate even faster. So a unit like you know, just a Quarreler, or, you know, Thunder or something doing damage to trolls will, even though they'll get the -5 leadership hit from being damaged by missiles, the plus 12 will make up for it. Now, the trick to this ability, it'd be something like Frenzy. So if we look at a unit with Frenzy here, where you can see we have Frenzy, this is when your leadership is lower than 50. If your leadership is above 50%, you're immune to psychology, melee attack, etc., etc. And yeah, you know, like even your regeneration, you know, trolls, if their hit points are above 20%, make them immune to psychology. So no fear and terror bombs. Well, they're immune to fear, but make them immune to terror. I don't know. You could do something like that, but make this a special ability, kind of like Frenzy, that if they're above 20% health, they get plus 12 leadership, and they regenerate even faster. But make that ability be reduced if they're below 20%, get it turned off if they're below 20% health, so they're going to, or if they're something like that, if they're going to route, but also make it so that the burnt debuff actually will turn that regeneration off, because that's the gameplay mechanic, right? Trolls can't regenerate burns in the lore, and I think this regeneration is always ticking, whether they're being burnt or not. I think if you give them a much stronger regeneration, and you give them a big leadership buff while they're above 20% health, and that ability is active, then the counterplay is, if you can bring a unit that gives them burnt, it takes away that regeneration ability totally for 10 seconds, plus takes off their plus 12 leadership, and adds this -8 leadership. So in this case, what would happen is the gameplay would be even more pronounced, in that trolls right now, you can hit them with anything, you know, rear charge them once, do anything, and their leadership just tanks. But I think it would be much more interesting is if they had a little more leadership. Like 12 leadership is it almost still only brings them to 52. It's not like their leadership is going through the roof, right? You know, it's not an insane amount, but 12 leadership makes it so being damaged by artillery that isn't flaming artillery will still only bring them back to 42, and being hit by missiles that aren't flaming missiles will still only bring them back. They can still be weak to fire damage, just like this, but the ability would be different, but they can regenerate even faster, and I think trolls should be the fastest regenerating unit in the game, as far as I'm concerned anyways, because that is the lore everywhere. Their regeneration is amazing, and that's where all regenerative, you know, abilities seem to stem from, this idea of trolls and their regeneration. So they should by far have the strongest regeneration, but you can make it so that you can counter that, and I mean really counter it, if you bring a unit that does flame damage. If you bring a unit that does flame damage, so they're weak to flame, and then if you really want to hard counter them, you bring a unit that will also give them the burnt debuff, and if they're burnt, that would for that 10 seconds also eliminate their regeneration completely, and along with the leadership. So I think it would make the game more interesting. It would make more trolls a lot more useful in a lot more situations, so that if if you're going up against the greenskins, they can bring trolls, and if you don't bring any kind of counter, you can still play against them. I mean, they still don't have a whole lot of armor, and they're still really big. They're still really easy to hit with missiles and artillery and cannons and everything else like that. And they're a large unit, so your anti-large units work effectively against them. You can still counterplay them, but if you really want to hard counter them in a very big way, you bring units that can imbue that. So for example, this gyrocopter does flame damage, so it would do more damage to them, but it doesn't give them the burnt debuff. Whereas a unit like the Iron Drake does give the burnt debuff. A unit like the Flame Cannon gives that burnt debuff. And I would imagine there's even some magic out there that will give that burnt debuff, which is the most powerful way to counter them. And it would bring in units like Iron Drakes and Flame Cannons. It would make them more useful, and it would make, if we saw a lot more trolls in the meta, because I think... So greenskins have trolls, and Chaos also has trolls. Yeah. So I think, where do we go? Monsters and Beasts, they have Chaos trolls and armored trolls. And I'm not sure if Beastmen have a version of trolls. I think they just have Chaos spawn. But anyways, that's what I have to say about trolls specifically. And it is, a twofold request, really. The first is just that I think trolls right now are very rarely seen, and even when they are on the battlefield, they are very rarely effective, because any kind of leadership attack can really hurt them. Whereas I would like to see their regeneration be insane like it is in the lore, but fire damage and that burnt could really terrify them, which it does in the lore, and it would make them a more interesting unit to see on the battlefield. So their stats are fine, even their leadership at 40 is fine. Change this ability, make it so it is a troll, call it troll regeneration, where they regenerate even faster, and if they're above 20% health, or if they're above 20% health and X kind of leadership or something, whatever it is, they're above X, they get an additional plus 12 leadership or so. You could play with that number, but I think that seems to be about right. But if you burn them, this ability turns off completely. They don't regenerate, and they lose their plus 12 leadership, and that'd be the way to scare them away. Now they'll go away, and they can start regenerating again if they're away from the fight, but they regenerate really fast, so you have to pay attention. A routing troll is something that you have to chase down. You can't just let it route and come back. And I think it would just make for more interesting gameplay, and a good way to look at an old unit that's been in the game for a long time. And I've never seen it really be a part of the online meta in a big way. Every once in a while you'll see trolls brought in, but it is very rare that they perform. So I think this could make it so that the game is more interesting. It's more fitting for the lore that you see these trolls, and it also inspires more counterplay. Like, how are you going to counter trolls if you come up against the greenskins? What's going to be your counter against them if you don't have flaming damage? You're going to have to focus a little more on anti-large units and things like that, because anti-large will do a number on these guys. They only have 40 armor. So anyways, that's a quick video about trolls. I think it would truly improve the game, even though it's in a small way. Make trolls fit the lore better, be a more interesting opponent, something more fun to fight against, more interesting. And that's make it so that if you brought flaming units, or like a Iron Drake, and your opponent brings lots of trolls, you'll be really happy. And if you don't bring any answers and he brings lots of trolls, you're going to be really sad. You're going to have to focus on that, and it would make trolls be a much more of a thing, even if it is a risk-reward scenario for the player bringing the trolls. They'll know it, but because right now you bring trolls as a new player, you might think they're going to be doing good, and and they get absolutely obliterated. Like, it is not unheard of to be able to rout trolls pretty easily before they even get to your line. Like, that is how low that leadership is. If they come in with an extra 12 leadership, they're going to get to the line and do some damage, and if you have no answers to that ability that gives them the regeneration in terms of something that imbues burnt, then you're going to have to focus a lot harder on them. And it's not like it's hard to focus on them. They're tall, they're big, you can shoot them, you can, do a lot of things. So anyways, love to hear some comments on trolls. I would really actually like to hear your thoughts on the lore of trolls. Do you find them as interesting as I do? I love trolls in the lore. I love them in D&D lore, and I love them in Warhammer lore. And when you think of a troll, what do you think of in terms of the lore? Have you, if you have any stories that you really liked, like the story I talked about where trolls were, a fun troll game is to try and rip off your opponent's head and throw it as far as you can, because they can't die, I would love to hear those types of things. And if you think that this type of idea of giving them stronger regeneration that is more susceptible to being burnt as something that will, give them the burnt debuff and remove that plus 12 leadership, so you could really hard route them if they're burning and on fire, which is what you see in the lore as well, in books and in these types of things. What do you think of that? And maybe you've thought about ways to improve trolls or make them more interesting in the game, and I would love to hear it. So that's all I have to say for now. Hope you found the video interesting, and I will see you soon.